As we come into 2026, there's been many challenges for farmers this year. You know, 24 was not good, 25 was not very good, and we come into 26, it's been a challenge. What's been one of the biggest topics that we've had though in agriculture? It's fertilizer prices, specifically nitrogen. You know, when we think about nitrogen fertilizer, farmers are going to use nitrogen fertilizer. So the question is how can we be most efficient with the fertilizers that we're going to buy and put out there, right? That's what we want to talk about today, just some tips on how to be most efficient with that nitrogen fertilizer that you're having to pay a lot of money to use. First off, I would encourage anybody that's going to use nitrogen fertilizer to stabilize it. We encourage a carbon-based type stabilizer. It's most beneficial to the soil. It improves soil health along with stabilizing that nitrogen. So that's one of the things that I would certainly talk about and encourage you to use is a stabilized nitrogen source. Another thing that I would think about doing is not applying all of my nitrogen on the very front end of planting. You know, sometimes we have been accustomed to going out there pre-plant, blowing a lot of nitrogen out there and just hoping that it stays there, even when it's stabilized, right? Hoping that it stays there through the season long enough for us to get the most benefit out of it. I would encourage you not to do that. And the argument might be, yes, I'm gonna have to make another pass in the field. Well, with the price of nitrogen today, guys, that pass in the field's probably gonna be cheaper than running that nitrogen. So I would encourage you to really take a look at maybe putting some pre-plant down or right there at planting time, put some nitrogen down, but take a look at that further through the season. You know, one of the things that we often talk about here at Concept AgriTek is spoon feeding the nitrogen. You know, and so when we spoon feed that nitrogen, all that's going to do is make the nitrogen that you use more efficient. What does that mean? That means you can cut some of that nitrogen back. Okay, so I'm not saying you can cut it out, that's not what I'm saying, but oftentimes when it's spoon-fed, we can use less nitrogen on that same crop and have the same yields. So that's some of the things that I would encourage you to look at. Also, don't forget that you can foliar feed some nitrogen today. I know that is not where you're going to get a lot of units of nitrogen out there, but remember when we foliar feed anything, whether it's nitrogen or potassium or micronutrients, now we're talking about parts per million in the plant versus pounds in the soil. So it takes much less product to foliar feed and still give that crop a little kick. So just remember, if you have cut back on your nitrogen, say pre-plant or during the growing season early, you've cut back on that, you're trying to save some bucks, but you start to see, man, I really need some more nitrogen. Remember, foliar feeding nitrogen is an option for you. Another option that you guys can have is to make sure that your potassium to nitrogen ratios are fairly balanced. You know, some of the habits that we've got into, especially when fertilizer prices might have been cheaper, is we put a lot of nitrogen out there, but we back up on K a little bit. When you balance your nitrogen to potassium ratios, remember that will also allow you to use less nitrogen fertilizer. These are just some tips and some things that you can look at when we're in this very volatile fertilizer, you know, environment, when the market's high and we don't know what the future is going to hold. Remember, guys, be as efficient as you possibly can.